The world according to Brock. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to get up close and personal with Brocky. I've known Peter for many years and this program is a unique insight into what makes PB tick. Peter has been asked many times to speak about his philosophy on life and his has certainly been an extraordinary one. So sit back and spend an evening with Brocky. Believe me, he can say things that you'd often like to say but can't. Peter has a unique ability to get to the heart of the matter and what he says makes a hell of a lot of sense. Now he openly speaks about it on this program. He listens, he communicates and reaches people in all walks of life and he asks the questions. So welcome to the world according to Brock. I'm Andrew Gaze.
Welcome to the world according to Brock. Life, as they say, is a journey, and every step of my journey has and continues to shape my own future.
Peter Brock was born on the 26th of February 1945. His parents, Ruth and Jeff Brock, came from Hurstbridge, a small community on the northeast fringe of Melbourne.
Look, as a kid, I really pushed the envelope. I'll be absolutely clear about that. I think it'd be fair to say my parents probably thought, what have we done to get this kid? I mean, he won't listen to us, he's off there doing his own stuff, and you know, he's headstrong and he's just going to do things his way. And certainly I can tell you that I felt compelled to do a lot of things like that. I was very fortunate. I had a fairly athletic sort of approach to life. I could get out there and run and jump and play footy and play cricket and swim and what have you, until cars finally got me. And I thought, yeah, hey, this car business is not bad. I can actually get this thing to do what I tell it to do. And to me, it made a lot of sense.
The warm summer air is suddenly shattered. The young man, Peter Brock, knows that at the Gumtree it's a sharp right. Then over the rise, along the old creek bed. Then a long, slow, snaking curve around a disused orchard. And then back to his excited pit crew.
So, as far as I was concerned, the moment that I actually took to driving, I found something I loved doing. I found what it is in life that was really my heart's desire, the thing I knew was right for Peter Brock.
The Brock family ancestry dates back to the beginning of Australian motorsport. Henry V. James, a great-uncle of Jeff Brock, Peter's father, was a founder of the Automobile Club of Victoria. He organised what became the first races on the east coast of Australia. It was those early family ties that captured Jeff's attention towards motorsport, and the fascination filtered through his young family.
When I started working for Austin Distributors in Melbourne, which used to be the old Austin Healey agents, and they raced them, I used to go along and take Peter and take the family. And of course Peter would never leave the fence, you know, he'd never be looking for ice creams or anything. He was mad keen.
Well, I always knew he'd be involved in some way with cars because he loved them so much. And when he decided to go racing, yes, we encouraged him. we said we would support him.
Well, the first noises he made as a baby were almost motor car noises. And then he'd ride his bike, you know, and he'd ride it as though it had a motor in it. And then he went on from that, you know, started driving on the farm here in the trucks. My dad used to let him drive the truck around. He'd set it going for him. It was too small to reach the pedals, but he'd steer it while Dad hopped up in the back and threw the grass hay out.
The Brock boys, Neil, Peter, Lewis, Philip, were all exposed to motorised sport at an early age. But Peter positively thrived on life behind a wheel, and this odd-looking vehicle was his outlet. Believe it or not, this was an Austin 7. Peter, with support from his father, assembled this from some derelict 7s in his spare time. In 1960, when Peter was 15, he watched the very first Armstrong 500, the forerunner to the Bathurst 1000. And throughout the day, Peter would jump into the beast and thrash around the family paddocks as if he were in the race. 7 years later, Peter realized his ultimate dream. Backed by his parents, his racing debut was made in this ungainly 179 powered Austin A30 at Winton. In it, he won a staggering 102 races over 65 meetings, and a motor racing career was launched.
We started going to Bathurst, of course, with his first drive, and that was an amazing situation. We had a business in which Peter was involved called the Diamond Valley Speed Shop. And Peter sat at the phone there, I reckon, for 3 weeks, waiting for Harry Firth to ring him. He'd had an interview with him and done a test drive. And of course, when Harry rang, Peter was over the moon, and he popped in on his way to Bathurst with the race car. They drove it there. And of course, the next day we hopped in our car and away we went. And never been there before, went up the mountain and had a pretty rugged time really, but anyway, he came in third and we were really pleased about that.
Working on the rest of the collection of Brocky's cars. As they come out, I'll get them. It's the first one of Brocky's Bathurst ones that I think would be out on display. I'm glad he come back actually, because he was one of the blokes that when I was following races 20 years ago, he was a bloke I loved to hate, because I was a Ford man and Brocky was always out in front, and you had to hate him or you loved him. So now he's back, I think he'll do all right, because it's good to see him come back and have a go, because I reckon that's what made motorsport. Blokes like Peter Brock, Dick Johnson, Alan Moffat, Gricey, what's his name, Jensen, they all made motorsport, and I like to see the older drivers come back and show the young blokes how it's done.
Hopefully I'll be very close to you.
Okay, I'd like to talk about something called the purpose for being. Bit of a strange one really, isn't it? Well, I suppose when you look at your life, you can divide it up into various facets, various cycles. And you start off as a child. And, you know, we get all these ideas about kids have got to be this, that and the other. Look, all the kid really has to do is have fun. They just enjoy themselves, learn how to play games, fit in with other kids around them, have their squabbles and stuff like that. But basically, a kid is all about having fun, just pure fun, taking on information, learning from the examples set by others, etc., etc. And then you move into your teen years, and teen years become a little bit different because all of a sudden you want to start experimenting with life. You want to start finding out for yourself what it really means. Very difficult to take on information as a teenager when people say to you, don't do this, don't do that, because generally speaking, you know best. And you look to yourself and say, well, what would they know? They can't. They wouldn't understand. I'm only a kid and I'm just sort of doing it my way. This is the way I see it. So teenager years are all about experimentation and finding out for yourself often what not to do. And I think parents have got to accept that that is a very valid approach in many ways for kids to take. You can't live your life for them. There's no doubt about that. And in this age we live in with, I guess, being very concerned about legalities and all sorts of insurance sort of issues, we just let those kids climb those trees. Let those kids do those things because that's how we learn. That's how we understand things, through going through life and seeing the processes of life. Then we move on to something, I guess, which is a little bit different. That is when young adulthood, and you're starting to form relationships, you're starting to look at how to start a family, and you're starting to look at your career, what it is you're wanting to do with your life. And you start to make decisions about what it is you're going to be doing, which is going to control the outcome for the rest of your life. In fact, it'd be fair to say that everything you do does control it to a certain degree, but these are critical years, there's no doubt about it. And then you move into parenthood. And parenthood is an interesting one because no one really knows what you're supposed to be doing. A lot of books on the subject, a lot of ideas out there, but I'll tell you one thing. The first child you have, there's no doubt you're going to treat that child differently than the number 2. And then if the number 3 comes along, you're going to treat them differently again because you'll learn from the experience. Parents learn from it. And I suppose it'd be easy to say, oh, well, we made a few mistakes. Well, that's just the way it is. But let's get back to that one later on. Then the thing you actually need to be doing next is, I guess, establishing yourself as a provider and as a person who is out there in the community making some form of contribution. You become a bit of a mover and shaker, or a person who actually can get things done out there because you've reached that stage in your life where you can actually make things happen. Very important part of your life, no doubt about it. Then as you move on, further on in your life, you can sit back and look at things and think, gee, I see things differently now. I've learnt to see things a little bit differently than what I did, say, a decade ago or back there when I was just a young parent or a teenager or whatever it might be. And I guess it'd be fair to say that what has happened is you have gained some wisdom from that experience. That's just the way it is. And hopefully you can pass along some of that wisdom to others. There is these days a certain feeling that once you've passed a certain number of years on this planet, you've passed your use-by date and you're no longer relevant. Well, perhaps that's been around forever, that sort of thinking. But the fact remains that certainly you have a major contribution to make based on the wisdom you've accumulated from all those experiences all those years gone by. So life is not about the destination. Life is all about the journey. It's all about allowing it to unfold and making the most of each experience as it comes to you. I mean, the whole business of being a kid, and you have childhood memories as you grow older. Being a teenager and those wonderful things that happen to you as a teenager, and sometimes those not so wonderful things. Some people sit back and think being a teenager was the most unhappy period of my life. I couldn't get my act together. I had all these relationship issues going on and on. But one thing is for sure, it was a time of experimentation and learning what not to do quite often. So it's very important. And I think from that, you've got to understand that there are no such thing as mistakes. We always look at life and think, oh, I made a major mistake there, and I regret it. I regret that period of time. Well, why do you regret it? If you've learned from it, if you've gained some sort of knowledge, some understanding, some sort of insight because of what happened to you, well, it's very important for you, isn't it? It's very important for your character development in becoming who you truly are. Because that moment that you had in your life, which could be classified as a mistake in someone's eyes, in fact was a great learning experience for you. So don't regret those things. Take them on board and say, that was a valuable experience. I'm now who I am based on all that stuff that's happened to me prior to all of this. So wisdom certainly comes from the experience. So when it came to driving motor cars or handling machinery, I guess I just took to it like a duck to water, it just happened. And part of that was because I loved it so much that it was something I took on board, and I enjoyed forming this partnership between myself and a piece of machinery. You see, it wasn't as if I was out there having this battle, making a car do what I was going to tell it to do. It was like, okay, car, together we can do these things. And I'm sure that that played a major part in why I was successful in doing what I was doing. Because when I started off, I had absolutely no plan whatsoever. I mean, people think, okay, you plan your life out, you train here, you do that, and pretty soon you're going to finish up down the track down there. Well, I didn't do it that way at all. As far as I was concerned, I just gave it the best shot in that particular field of endeavour I was in at that time, and the next opportunity, the next choice I had in life unfolded in front of me, and it became apparent what to do. I might have made some mistakes and made the wrong choices at times, but basically, if I looked at my life, it was pretty well on track. And I could no longer have believed I'd finished up where I am today than fly to the moon. I think, well, how would you ever plan to do that? Your mind can never conceive it. So my best advice to a lot of people is, look, just let life unfold. Too often, we try to force young kids into making a decision that's going to be holding them in a certain direction the rest of their life. It mightn't be a decision based on their heart, but one that's based on their head, one that's based on logic. Well, unfortunately, logic doesn't necessarily run what we have to do in our lives. It's to do with our feelings, our emotions, and a whole host of other things that come into it. Now, that might sound a bit airy-fairy, but the fact remains, I mean, you've got to follow your dreams. Simple as that. You've got to get out there and do something that you believe is the right thing for you to do. I mean, as a kid, you should be enjoying yourself as a young child. As a teenager, just enjoy being a teenager. I mean, I just got out there and did teenager type things. I didn't go in there thinking, well, I've got to be this way or that way or whatever the society is telling me I've got to be. I just enjoyed life. I just did it. Went around there and just did teenager type things. How can I explain it any other way? And I sort of got by. I learned a lot about life. And I certainly got to the next phase of my life and figured out, yeah, I've got a bit of self-confidence now. I understand what I can do and what I can't do. And next thing I know, I became a race driver. So life is very much how you make it. It's allowing it to unfold and not getting too far ahead of yourself. And if you just accept the way life does unfold, give it your absolute best shot, have a red-hot go with whatever you are doing in life, it'll work out pretty well.
Well, Bev is, for those of you out there might know this, Bev's actually a dietitian and a nutritionist, and I dare say there's a few people around on this planet that have copped a bit of advice from Bev at different times. Now, I've been the recipient of that, and over the last 2 decades, I guess, I've gone from eating absolute crap, just junk, on the run, you know, this nearest thing, yep, that'll do, and into now being quite selective about what I put in my body. Well, I guess that I figured it this way. You've got one body that you're given when you arrive on this planet. And if you want to be able to do whatever it is you want to do in life, well, look after it.
Well, health and well-being haven't necessarily been a high priority all of my life. I mean, it is now, but at one particular stage, I just figured, well, you know, this body will just do what I tell it to do. And I didn't eat well, and I basically gave my body a pretty torrid time. But like most people, you get to a certain point in your life and you figure, well, this has got to change. We can't continue to do this and operate at the same sort of level as, you know, you might when you're a kid. What changed for me was Bev broke her neck water skiing a few years back, and they were going to do all sorts of things to her. They're going to fuse her spine, they're going to remove things and cut and shut, and they said you're not going to walk and you're not going to have kids and you're not going to dance. And anyway, Bev obviously went ahead and did all those things, and she had some residual issues they had to take care of, and she went and saw a chiropractor. Now, as far as I was concerned, chiropractors, what would they know? I mean, let's be real. You know, Bev went along, had some remarkable results. Got rid of all of the residual issues that were left over from breaking her neck. It was number 3 down here, she broke. And she said, I'm making an appointment for you to go along there. And I said, me? Nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. You know, usual male denial type of deal. Anyway, I went along a few weeks later, and I remember to this day walking into the clinic, up to the reception desk, and gave my name, and they said, fill in that form there, this book please, on the reason for coming along here. And I wrote in there, reason for attendance. I wrote in there, wife made me. And a bit of a joke at the time amongst all the staff, but it was quite true. So I actually got sort of into this whole business of checking out the human body and seeing how it's working, and I figured I was doing pretty good. I was in for a bit of a shock. I found out there was a number of areas in my body that I wasn't as fit and well as I thought I was. I was still functioning okay, but obviously the warning signs were there. Suffice to say that after getting my spine straightened out, after changing my diet around a bit, then the next 12 months I grew 1 inch in height. Now I can prove that because each year as a motor racing driver you've got to have a medical. They measure your height, your weight and all sorts of things about you, and I remember the doctor being quite surprised that, hey, you've grown a bit, which wasn't bad when I was aged 39 years old. So this sort of changed my outlook a bit. I figured, if I'm going to get the most out of life, I'm going to have to start changing my attitude a bit. And I'd always been happy-go-lucky, which was, you know, taking motor racing as it comes and sort of getting out there and enjoying myself, which was a major asset that I did have. But one area where I was not looking after my body was in the area of diet, rest, and probably looking at things like supplements, etc., etc. So, okay, I was looking after it from my attitude point of view, but the rest of it, no way. So that changed my life, and I can say quite honestly that at this particular period of my life, I'm probably healthier, and I'm probably about as fit as I ever have been in my life. I jumped off this bridge here due to a double dare back when I was about 9-year-old. I jumped in that creek. I wouldn't do it now, but I had to take responsibility for it, didn't I? Would I do it again? I'm not too sure if I would, actually. I'm a bit older, a bit wiser, but at the time it was there to be done, and well, that's what happens in life. But this owning your own power, it's a very important aspect of life, because you tend to be we tend to always want to hand it over to other people. You know, it's your fault, you're to blame. I wouldn't have done this unless you made me, or else you caused me to do this through some manipulation or some sort of idea you put in my mind, etc., etc. The fact of the matter is that you've just got to accept that everything you ever say and do, every action you ever take, you own it. It's your own responsibility. If you don't like it, well, don't do it. It's as simple as that. And as soon as people start understanding that, they start becoming more empowered with their own life, more in charge of what they're doing. And you feel a lot better about things, I can tell you that. The other thing is that if something does go wrong, we're often tempted to get someone else to take care of it, just to absolve ourselves of any input whatsoever and say, you fix it, it's your deal. Well, my best advice is, look, fix it yourself. If there's some drama going down, if there's someone who needs talking to, if there's something that needs happening, get on the phone, confront the situation personally, but fix it yourself. It's never as bad or as hard or difficult as what it first seems. And it does, again, give you a sense of satisfaction, a sense of fulfilment when you know you've completed something like that. So I guess what this brings us to is the responsibility that each and every one of us has for our own choices. And it doesn't matter if you say, well, look, I'm down the pub and someone's saying, look, have another beer, you know, you'll be right, come on, you know, you're weak if you don't have another beer, and so on and so forth. You get peer group pressure, it's called. And so you sit back and you might succumb to it. And later on you might think, booze busts on the way home, or some drama's happened to you. And you get easy to get, you know, into that system of blame, I guess, isn't it? But really you are responsible for saying no. You're responsible for every choice you ever make in your life. And again, it's one of those things where not only do you feel good about making that decision yourself, but people actually look at you and think, this person's got a strong mind. This person's in charge of their own stuff. We admire that. So it's a pretty good role model sort of deal as well. The other thing is you create your own reality. And the sooner we start understanding about this business of cause and effect, I mean, it's easy to actually start blaming others for the way our world is actually unfolding in front of us. But the truth of the matter is that we do create our own reality. Everything we ever say and do makes it work out just the way it is. Look, I've had situations there of driving a racing car where some people have said, oh, gee, I wouldn't get out there. Oh, it's too wet. You know, you're on slick tyres and it's bad, and, you know, if I go fast out there, I'll crash. Well, I look at it this way. I'm out there, I'm doing it, and I'm going to adjust what I'm doing according to the circumstances. If I think it's too wet and slippery, I'll drive slow. I'm not going to drive fast because someone says to me, you've got to drive fast or else. You've got to be true to yourself. And once you actually get into that sort of space and you start understanding that the way you're doing it is not only is it the best you can personally do at that particular time, but you are in fact creating your own reality as it's unfolding. You're not going to get involved in some drama because someone else has told you that this is a good thing to do. You're saying to yourself, this is what I'm doing, I'm sticking with it, I'm responsible for me, and I'm therefore allowing my reality, my life to unfold according to my own choices, my own decisions. So it's not what happens to you in life necessarily, it's what you do about it. It's a bit of an old saying, I suppose, you hear around the traps from time to time, that one, but really we can be involved in some things in life and we can see them all happening around us. And sometimes you might feel personally involved and sometimes you might sit back and go, well, what's that got to do with me? I mean, it just depends on your perception and the circumstances as they are unfolding. But the fact remains that it's not what actually happens to you, it's really how you respond to it, what you do about it. I mean, you can have, I had a tail shaft break on me in the start line of Bathurst one year, and it was, to all intents and purposes, pretty horrendous because this is your big chance, you know, there you are on the start line, once a year, big chance to win the race, and tail shaft breaks. And what do you do about it? Well, one option, one choice was to get out of the car and just start abusing people, take off my helmet and throw it around. And I guess the media love to see that sort of display of anger and petulance because from many people's perspective, you show how much you really care about it by the amount of anger you display. Well, I didn't see it that way. I thought, okay, all is not lost. Let's have a go at trying to fix this car up. So with one thing and another, we negotiated a manner in which we could push the car up the main straight, roll it backwards down pit lane, fix the fending component, get back in the car and get back in the race. Now I rejoined the race something like 21 minutes late. And as I went around the Hell corner, up the mountain straight, the crowd were cheering, they said, yeah, Broggy, go, Broggy, you can win. I thought, we like a bit of optimism, this is good. Anyway, I pressed on and I drove that race as hard as I possibly could. And the pit crew responded magnificently because they sort of felt like they should be also doing much the same thing, I'm sure. And they did the quickest pit stops and they were in pretty good spirits, generally speaking. Now, at the end of that race, they have an evaluation of the amount of, or the value of television coverage that each team gets. Now, I finished third outright in the TV coverage stakes, despite the fact I finished something like 17th outright. And all I can say is that my sponsor in those days, Mobil, came to me and they said, Peter, somehow you've come up smelling like roses. We don't know how it's happened, but as long as you want to be involved in this motor racing business, we're with you. So I guess the upshot of that was, my choice was petulance, anger, park the car, or get the most out of what we've got to do out here today. And that was, let's celebrate being at this track and just going around there as fast as we possibly can and see what happens. And the seeing what happens turned out to be one of the most rewarding days of my life. One of the other interesting aspects of life is that you draw people, events or experiences to you in order for you to learn from them. For instance, if you're an angry person or you have some anger within you, you'll always be surrounded by angry people. It can really lead to all sorts of interesting experiences, and the trick to it all is to sit back and say, what does this all mean? I mean, you can very easily get into blame, you can very easily get into poor me type of deals of going, why is this always happening to me? I've got all these people around me, I know they're always trying to rip me off or do something like that. Well, look at yourself first, because the quickest way to change things around you is to change yourself. You change yourself, change your perspective, recognise even what it is you need to be looking at, and immediately things around you will start to change. Simple as that. Another part of the human experience is that you don't have to be right all the time. I mean, sometimes people say they're right, might not necessarily be right, but they are quite adamant they're right. Let them be right. You don't have to argue with them, just let them have that point of view, that from where they're coming from their perspective, hey, they probably think it's all pretty cool. But you don't have to be right all the time. And remember this, a wise man will hold their counsel. They'll just know within themselves, they'll feel happy within themselves that I know where I'm coming from, and that's fine by me. So in a sense, it's being self-confident and happy with who you are. If you are happy with who you are and where you're coming from, you don't always have to feel the right to be right. You don't have to conquer. You don't have to be putting them in their place because you think they don't know what they're talking about. Let them be. A wise man will often just hold their counsel and just let it be. People very rarely draw the connection between the way their mind thinks versus the way that their life unfolds, but there is certainly a very strong connection, and that is in the world of limitations. And it's fair to say that as you grow, as you become aware of the world around you, you take upon you a certain belief structure which says that's possible, that's not possible. That's achievable, that's not achievable. And so we have this thing called limitations. And limitations work very, very well indeed, because you can always get to the point of saying that's the sales target that we're going to go for, and that's the one you get. So you get what your heart desires, more or less. One of the things that I found a few years ago, many years ago actually, I was racing at Amaroo Park in Sydney, and a very twisty, tight track, and I was driving a Torana XU1. Now, the Torana XU1 was a great little racing car, very good on twisty tracks, but very narrow. And because it was narrow, it got on two wheels very easily. And some people saw that as being bad, some people thought it was good. I tended to look on the good side of things. I thought, oh yeah, I can get this car up on two wheels, I can cut corners. I'm not actually dragging sand and gravel, etc., back onto the track and incurring the wrath of the clerk of course. So lifting wheels was good. At any rate, I got to Amaroo Park. I finally got there, and a couple of guys I knew very well also raced there, and they were absolutely king up that particular track, both driving Torana XU1s. Anyway, the father of one of them came up to me, and he said, gee, Brocky, you're going to have your work cut out this weekend. He said, the boys are fast here. He said, your teammate's fast. He said, my son always fast. And he said, mind you, you know, I'm sure you can do pretty well, but you've got to understand how they drive around the track. He said, my son, he said, he goes up the main street and he curves up to the right there and he comes across that corner over the top of the hill up there. He said, absolutely flat. And then he takes the next right-hander down the hill fast, and then the next big long right-hander, he takes a flat out, and he described how his son went around the track. I listened. I thought, man, it sounds fair enough. So I went out there and I had a little bit of what they call a sighter lap. I drove around for a lap or so on my little XU1, looked at it all, married up the words he was talking about with the geography, with the bit of road I was on. I thought, oh, this is a bit where he says you can go flat out. Yeah, looks possible. Yeah, bit over here. Yeah, get the car nicely through there, etc., etc. So the next lap around, I came into the main straight absolutely flat out. Went up there in a little XU1 Tirana, flat out in third gear, put it into fourth gear, up the right-hand side of the track, curve left over the top of the crest of the hill where he said his son goes over flat. Car popped up on two wheels and I just kept it flat, straight across the curb on the inside, never touched it, just straight over there in two wheels. About 70 metres later, came back down again, on with the brakes, back to third, next right-hand corner, went through the next right-hand corner down the back straight, flat out, etc., etc. I knocked 0.6 of a second off the lap record my first flying lap. Did another 2 or 3 laps, came in, parked the car, talked to my mechanics. We thought life is pretty good. Anyway, down the hill came the father, huffing and puffing, red in the face, flustered. He'd been standing on top of the hill watching, and he came up to me and said, Brocky, he said, I've never seen a car so far up on two wheels in my life when you got over the top of that hill. He said, I could see the tail shaft underneath that little Tirana XU1. And I said, well, that's what happens when you go over there flat out. I guess it gets up on two wheels. He said, you went over there flat out? He said, I was winding you up. He said, my son's never been over there flat out in his life. Well, you can imagine the consternation in the pits. People were stunned by someone who didn't know any different, just all of a sudden going over this hill flat out and knocking 0.6 of a second off the lap record. So you may all wonder, what happens from there on in? Well, like a lot of other things in life, once someone had proven it could be done, they removed their limitations. And before the weekend was out, even though they were dragged kicking and screaming and thrown into the cars, they knew that to play the game, and it was just a game we were playing really, they had to go over the top of that hill flat out themselves. And they did. And it was amazing how that became normal. That became what people did. All because someone had decided it was possible. So it's a bit like that with the human race, I guess. I mean, we time and again, we see new records broken because someone said, yeah, I can do it. 10-second barrier for 100 metres. There's a number of sporting records like that. But not only in sport, I think almost in every endeavour in life, we have these limitations that we do place in front of ourselves about all that is possible, based on our own belief systems. But the belief system changes because someone else has done it. Someone's just shifted the goalposts a bit, and guess what? It becomes the way that human beings now believe that this is what's going to work out. So there is a difference between belief and knowing something. I mean, a belief is basically something that you've taken on board and you said, yeah, I think it's possible. I'll give it a go. And you therefore set out to sort of let it unfold. But a sense of knowingness, you've taken it on board, it becomes part of your character, part of your energy, part of who you are. It becomes part of what you represent. And so when you arrive somewhere, people look at you and go, well, this person's just going to do it, because you know it. So knowingness has not the slightest tinge of doubt, whereas belief, there's a little bit of a doubt there because you're not too sure, is it possible or not possible. So limitations are the single most important factor in holding us back from getting our full potential out of any situation. And all I can say to you is remove those limitations and life will unfold very nicely indeed. Just look at it and go, it's a possibility. Yeah, I'm a possibility thinker. Yeah, I'll give it a red hot go and see what happens. And after all, that's all you can ever ask of yourself, isn't it? Success. What is success? I mean, it's one of those things that people think it's measured in how much money you made out of a business deal, how you vanquished the opposition, you crushed them, and you know, this big battle we had, we won this battle. In sporting terms, it's often thought of as being having to win everything you go in. And I mean, people have got this strange idea that that's what's motivated me and that I've always won everything I've gone into. That's far from the case, I can tell you. No, I think success is a little bit different. I think success basically is getting the most out of the situation that has unfolded in front of you. For instance, I've actually gone in some races at times and I've driven a piece of machinery that is struggling, you know, that might have a wobbly tail shaft in it or something like that, and you drive around, you think, ooh, if I go too much faster, this car's just going to fall apart at the seams, nearly shaking itself to bits. So you adjust yourself and you find a way of driving it where you're dodging all the potholes and bumps and undulations, you're changing gears very, very carefully, and you're squeezing the throttle down, and you're applying something which we'd call mechanical sympathy. You're very sympathetic to the machine in which you're operating. And in fact, you're caring about its well-being because you're driving around its problems. And you might finish up getting a pretty reasonable sort of result out of it all. And you sit back at the end of the day and think, given the way the day was, that was pretty successful. Could have been totally disastrous, but it worked out okay. And for those of you who've known what you've had to put up with, it's a totally different feeling. You see, you can very easily get caught up with what other people's see, what other people's idea of success is. Because they might see you either win or you've failed. And a lot of people are actually motivated by this, this win or failure type deal. And in fact, the fear of failure does drive them. But you know, there is an alternative, and that is the enjoyment of success. And the enjoyment of success is simply loving being where you are, enjoying every moment, and just making the most of the situation as it unfolds, as I said before. So other people can often put their ideas to you, but all I can say to you is don't get sucked into them. Don't get sucked into them, because each situation's a little bit different. So make the most of every opportunity that comes to you in your life. If you see something unfolding which you might see as unsavoury, something you mightn't like doing, something which is going to be distasteful to you, but it has to be done. And this is what life is all about sometimes. We have to do these things. And you look at it and you say, right, you have a determination that I'm going to make the most of this situation. You approach it with honesty, integrity, and you decide you're going to make the most out of it by enjoying whatever the outcome may be. And so you'll allow it to unfold. And as it unfolds, you see that, in fact, it's worked out far better than what it might have. All because you held in your idea, this idea in your mind that said, I'm after the best possible outcome. So when you measure success, you'd have to say success is all about the best possible outcome you can manage given the situation. Some years ago, I started reading about something called creative visualisation. You know, see yourself on the victory dais, you sit down and prepare your victory speech maybe a week or two beforehand, and you get it all right and you rehearse it, so you see yourself as some sort of victor. Well, I can tell you, for me, that never ever worked. And I don't know too many people it actually has worked for, because what happens is you get ahead of yourself. And while you're out there doing what it is you should be doing, instead of that, your mind's somewhere else. Your mind is already there at the conclusion of the event or the conclusion of the situation. You see yourself as being somewhere other than where you are. Now, the most powerful thing you can do to ensure that you get the most out of any situation and to ensure it's the most successful outcome is to be where you are. Just be right where you are. Just, if you're a swimmer, you're in that pool, you are swimming. You're rolling one arm over after the other. If you're on a racetrack, as I would be, I'm driving around that racetrack and I'm in the corner right now and I'm getting it just right. I'm getting the gear shift just right, putting the brakes just right. Never, ever do I allow myself the thought to actually jump ahead of myself and see myself at the conclusion of the event. That's the quickest way to lose concentration and to make sure that things don't go as well as they possibly can. So you've got to be very sure that you are really looking at yourself. Now, that brings another issue up. A lot of people sit back and they study what the opposition is doing. They study them all the time and say, I've got to beat that opposition, I've got to beat them, I've got to beat them, I've got to be... And they start looking at the opposition and denigrating the opposition. I never do that. I always praise the opposition. They're worthy opponents, they're terrific at what they do, and, you know, good luck to them. Let them get out there and do their very best. But then I put that out of my mind and I get on with what I do, which is, okay, Peter, here's what you're here to do at this moment. And I don't care if it's sitting down, drawing something, having a bit of a sketch. I want to do a nice drawing. or if I'm going to be out there talking to a group of kids about getting the most of their life, I'll put maximum effort into talking to those kids about that life. I won't be thinking about driving home or, gee, you know, that was a pretty thin crowd here today and it wasn't worthwhile. I just do what I do. And if it's on the racetrack, it is absolutely making the most of the moment on that track, enjoying it, loving it, appreciating it. And then you get, once you've got yourself into that mode, once you're actually looking at yourself and getting the most out of yourself, it unfolds perfectly. If you are after anything in your life, obviously you owe it to yourself to give it your best shot. Now, this is all looking at what success is. That means adequate rest, eating the right foods, making sure that your mental approach is as positive and as focused as what it needs to be. In other words, you're looking at yourself and concerning yourself with getting the most out of what you've got in terms of your abilities, rather than wasting energy worrying about the opposition. Worrying about the opposition simply disempowers you, I can assure you of that. So success, the ingredients are look at yourself, make the most of the moment and enjoy what you're doing. There's nothing quite like picking a bit of fresh fruit off your own trees. It seems to taste a bit better. This one here, the little finch have actually built a nest in this kumquat. Nice little nest in here, which they're using. And who knows, when it gets the right time of the year, they breed like rabbits, these finches. They're amazing. There's nothing like sort of growing your own fruit. We grow it organic, so no sprays, so you can pick it straight off the tree and just eat it. Tastes delicious, absolutely. Particularly when it's your own, I can tell you. Something called, I guess, fitting in with the world around you, otherwise known as social commitment. I guess you could say it's about making a contribution to the world in which you live. Now, that doesn't mean to say that life is all about accumulating assets, having all these properties, these large business organisations, and leaving this dynasty to your kids, etc. I mean, life isn't really about that. I mean, that's not to say that those things don't have their values, but there's more to it than that. And I think it'd be fair to say that your commitment to the world around you is one of the most important aspects of your life. Now, to do that, you've got to start with yourself. You got to look at yourself and think, well, what is it that I can do and to fit in with my family, to contribute to my family's welfare, whether that is through passing on some little gems of wisdom, or maybe ensuring that you spend quality time together, or you go away for that nice holiday, or whatever it might be. But your family is the next thing you should look at. And then you've got to look at the community around you. You've got to look at the area in which you live and how you can contribute to the welfare of that community. The people in it, new ideas, new progressive sort of developments that may well change the way in which kids are entertained, or that they see life. They can, might be a fun park, it might be something to do with recreation, it might be a new educational system at a local school, or something like that. But the bottom line is community is the next thing you've got to look at. And then you've got to look at the country in which you live. Now, it's very easy to be very insular and say, oh, the only thing that exists is this country in which we live. I mean, it'd be fine to think that because it's a magnificent country. But we've also got to consider that we have this planet in which we live. And Australia is very much part of planet Earth, this globe in which we live. Now, everything we say and do, it sounds fairly unreasonable to say this, but everything we say and do does make a difference to the big wide world in which we live. And I think the sooner we start realising that the contribution we make, whether it's in not polluting things, It's in giving something to someone on the other side of the world because they appear to be in some sort of distress. All of those things make a difference. And if we all change our point of view, it can make an enormous difference to the welfare of the world in which we do live. The other thing is relationships. Now, relationships are only as good as what your self-worth is. If you see yourself as being less than, if you've had an upbringing where you've been told by perhaps a school teacher or a parent or someone like that that says that you're not that smart, you're not that good, you can't actually manage to do all these different things because you actually believe it, you've taken it on board. They will affect your relationships enormously, and you find yourself at odds with that person around you. And with relationships, the strange thing is you always tend to attract to yourself that person who's going to give you the greatest possible lessons in life. They're the things you've got to look at. It might aggravate you. Sometimes your kids can drive you crazy. But instead of chastising your kids or talking about how bad your kids might be, have a look at yourself and say to yourself, why is it those kids are responding to me in that manner? And when you can actually start looking at things with that level of courage and to look deep within yourself, you start solving all these little puzzles in life. So relationships really do reflect how you feel about yourself. Let's face it, some people get aggravated by things, some people don't at all. They think something might be quite amusing, you think it's the most horrendous thing you've ever heard. All depends on how you're feeling about yourself, how you see yourself. Now, that leads us to non-judgment. And it's pretty easy to get into judgment because we're taught by, I guess, media in general that this is good and this is bad. This person over here is someone terrible and this one over here is doing something wonderful. Well, look, from their perspective, people who do things in life are doing what they think is the best thing for them to do at that time. Even if in the extreme cases where they're getting involved in, I don't know, taking drugs or something like that, they're doing that because they're trying to make themselves feel better. And if they're driving a car, for instance, and they're driving along and they're disregarding what you're doing, how do you know that person hasn't just received some horrendous sort of news? They're preoccupied with some sort of issue that might be to do with family health and who knows, it might be cancer or something like that. And they're preoccupied, they're worried by it, and all of a sudden they're out there doing things which have upset yourself. So try always to be tolerant, a little bit understanding, and just try and take on board the fact that, well, from that person's perception, they're trying to live their life the best way they possibly can. Mightn't suit you, but be a bit tolerant. And I think that if we got into less judgment of those around us, the world would settle down and be a much better place in which to live. Now, this leads us to something which will be a little bit controversial, I'm sure, and that is, firstly, you've got to become selfish. You've got to actually look at yourself and look very carefully at yourself and look after yourself because, look, unless you've developed healthy attitudes within yourself about how you can see life, what you contribute, how you wish to be tolerant and understanding and loving and all those good things, if you can't do that, you're no good to anyone else. If you're in some sort of mess, it's very hard to be a good parent, very hard to be a good boss at work, very hard to be able to contribute to the world around you in a meaningful manner if you don't feel good about yourself. Now, I'm not saying that you have to always remain selfish, but to solve the problems, have a look at yourself. And then, of course, you can start looking outside yourself. You start contributing to the world around you, and you start being, I guess, a person who is going to be a giver rather than a taker. You're going to be actually able to contribute it very much to the welfare and the world in general. Look, as a simple example, next time you get an aeroplane, remember those words that the flight attendants tell you. And they say things like, okay, in the case of an emergency, the oxygen masks will drop from the panel above you. Take your own, fit it to your own face, and then give it to your kids. It's no good the other way around, is it? You're no good to those kids if you're actually suffering from lack of oxygen because you're simply trying to fit the mask to them. So you've really got to look after yourself first, and then you can make this major contribution to the world around you. So social commitment, it's a big one, but it really does mean, I guess, what life is all about. It's contributing to others, contributing to the upliftment of others, and to make sure that the planet in which we live is a better place when you've left it than when you arrived here. This is a bit different up in here, I can tell you. Very quiet, very peaceful, and a 360-degree panoramic view of the countryside. One of the most important life skills that a person can acquire is the art of communication. And I suppose in this day and age of everything's digitised, etc., they figure, oh, you can just spell check stuff, it doesn't matter. You know, you just sort of, you can get your way through it all. I beg to disagree. I think that it's important you learn how to communicate with people, to do so both verbally and also to be able to write stuff, to put your feelings down, to actually express what it is you really want. One of the greatest problems that we actually are confronted with out there in society is that other people misunderstand where other people are coming from, and they think that they're being attacked or they're being slighted in some way, there's some sort of problem out there, or they've misheard something. So communication is absolutely vital. It's one of those things that we tend to gloss over. Now, a person who can communicate well, not only are they reasonably articulate and they can put a point of view across and they can understand where the other person's coming from, they've also got to know when it's appropriate to be silent and to listen and to let someone get the message off their chest and say the things they want to say. Because quite often, if you're being unheard, it can be very, very frustrating. It can lead to all sorts of complications in your life, all sorts of emotional imbalances and things like that. So communication, the art of listening, are two things that I would heartily recommend that you put some time and effort into, because it makes an enormous difference to your effectiveness as a human being on this planet. Well, as you can see, it's a magnificent panoramic view up here. Those lovely rolling fields there across the Great Dividing Range. And I suppose you might wonder, is this what your average garden variety ex-racing car driver does in their spare time? Do they all have one of these buildings? Probably not. Probably not. In fact, I'd say that they do not. But it suits me because, you know, I've got the farm, and some years ago I decided I was going to embark upon a pathway which said, okay, life is pretty good. It's been very, very kind to me, and I've got the frame of mind that says I'd like to put something back into the community at large, the world at large. And in order to do that, quite often you really need to find those quiet times where you can sit back down there and simply get yourself attuned to the world around you. Just get yourself back in that special place where you revitalise yourself. You actually start getting back into understanding what the real values in life are, not the crazy ego-driven, money-driven sort of stuff that we get every day, but you've got to step back from it occasionally and say, right, let's calm things down a bit. You know, one of the things I look at is the need for people to try and escape the pain of life or the confusion of life. And one of the ways they try to do that with is to use some sort of substance to just sort of remove them a little bit from where they are, you know, just a little bit. Because they start off saying, there's pain here, I don't like it. How can I get out of here a bit? So alcohol is a very favourite way of doing it. I guess nowadays a lot of designer drugs, ecstasy and stuff like that. And they take a bit and they just shift. I mean, these days binge drinking among kids is just a staggering amount. I mean, it's just astonishing how much happens. And I don't judge those kids at all. I don't feel that they're bad or that they've done something that is unforgivable, etc., etc. I just think these kids have arrived on this planet
and they've realised it's not what they thought it was going to be. They're not prepared for the stuff that's out there. And so it's just like it's a course of action they've decided to undertake. My very best advice there is, look, you need to be confronting those issues. You need to be looking at them and understanding what they really do mean to you, and getting out there and learning about how you can cope with them, or how you can actually gain from that experience by putting yourself in there and seeing the value of it. So it's a change in perception which changes everything, because then you start realising, hang on, I'm not a victim of life. I'm in charge of my own stuff. I'm in charge of life. I can make my own life what it is I want to do. So, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, people decide to do that, but it needn't run their lives. Places like this, where you can sit back and sort of get life into perspective, they play a very, very important role in allowing you to see life for what it truly is, and that is a magnificent learning experience.